We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Chess Avant-Garde. They are the global diversity, inclusion, belonging, and social impact at LiveRamp Chess. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to chat with you today. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and also when you were younger, how did you answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? That'd be great.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, Christina and the All Voices family. My name is Chess. I am the Global DIB and Social Impact Lead at LiveRamp, where we make it safer and easier for companies to use data effectively. My pronouns are any pronouns, really: he, she, they, them, whatever, whatever fits the bill that day, I'll roll with. And when I wanted to be, who did I want to be when I grew up? I really actually wanted to be a paleontologist. I think that was my first answer. I was really into just like wildlife and history, earth sciences, anything in that world. And really, that kind of like followed me through to college. Like, I don't think that ever stopped being an aspiration of mine to be involved with the environment in some kind of way, whether that was like with animal protection or environmental protection. At one point, I was going to school for petroleum engineering. So, the whole gamut, but that it still sits with me today. It really does.
I love that answer. Taking care of the earth that takes care of us.
Okay, that's how I do.
That's how you do it. Well, what defines you today? Who would you say you are? I know I read through your bio, but always like to hear in your own words too.
Yeah. I think what it defines me today is really approaching life and myself with grace regularly. And I think that funnels into my work in the DIB space, obviously, because when you are fighting towards justice, one thing that we don't realize we need the most of is grace, right? And you need grace for the days when it's long and hard. You need grace for the days where you might want to cuss somebody out. You need grace for, when you've got to prepare decks and provide metrics and do all these things that you don't want to do, because you got to convince somebody that justice is the right way, right? Like, I think grace has really given me so much peace in my personal life and my professional life and any endeavor that I have sought out to do. And I didn't always prioritize it. I didn't realize that it was such a necessary tool and skill, I'll even say. But yeah, grace really defines me. And it really helps me feel the most present in any moment, whether that's positive or negative.
I love that answer because it's both grace for others, but also yourself, especially
Mm-hmm.
long term doing this
Mm-hmm.
work. I feel like the people who I've talked to in the DIB space is a certain kind of person who makes the intentional choice to show up for others and themselves every
Yes.
single day.
Yes.
What really
Yes.
led you to your DIB work and specifically at LiveRamp?
I think what led me here is actually my childhood. So I grew up as a child of a political activist and campaign manager and a community organizer. I was the 7-year-old who was sitting on the steps during a sit-in. I was, spending overnight in front of City Hall in an RV. I was campaigning and marching in the streets of Trenton, New Jersey as a kid. And that's just like, by the way I grew up. My parents were both heavily involved in the political scene in the 90s and the early 2000s. We didn't really have an option not to go to said events. Even when we had a babysitter, the babysitter was also social justice minded. So we were at the events anyway. Like, that's just kind of what I grew up in. And then when my family left New Jersey, here you have this very robust, energetic, Black, Jewish kid living in the South and thrown into a completely different energy, right? So we moved to Atlanta, and Atlanta's a beautiful Black city. I loved growing up and being surrounded by Blackness regularly, right? But when I became a teenager, my queer identity really started to form and transform and inform so much of who I became to be. And so during that time, that's what was actually really difficult, because while I was being liberated in my Blackness, I was also experiencing extreme exclusion and no belonging because of my queerness and my Jewishness, because the South is heavily Christian. And so there was a lot of exile for me personally.
Right.
And that's when I really started to think about, oh, what is this feeling I have of not being included? Didn't have that language at the time, but that's really what it was. How is this affecting my mobility, socially, but also academically? How is this informing my relationships with my family and my community? So I knew kind of like from then, both with my childhood and that experience I was having in high school, was going to push me to be in some kind of role. I won't even say industry, but a role that allowed me to influence how people were treated at a given time or in a given space. Then when I went to college, I had to have a job. So my first job was as a research assistant in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion with the Department of Psychology, actually. And so diversity and inclusion was just like there for me, and I didn't even know. I was just looking for a research assistantship. That's the one that was available. It's the one that I got, and that really started my diversity inclusion career, and I've been in it ever since. So that's kind of like the backstory. Professional story is graduated from college. I actually started a full-time job my junior year of undergrad. So I was working full-time remotely and finishing my degree, working with a nonprofit based out of New York City called Broadway Dreams Foundation, where I was leading education and diversity initiatives. So really thinking through like, how do we make this space, Broadway, more diverse and inclusive? How do we build better initiatives? How do we partner with K through 12 schools and universities? Got pulled out of there to go to Niantic, which is a gaming company in Los Angeles and San Francisco. They kind of do like AR, most known for Pokemon Go. Was there working with my last supervisor, Trinidad Hermida, who was just like launched and accelerated my career so fast. And then I ended up at LiveRamp. And I came to LiveRamp because during my time at Niantic, I was very, very data-driven and in a data-driven role. And LiveRamp is obviously like a data-driven company. It's a data infrastructure. It's a platform. It's this monster and this beautiful institution that can really leverage data in ways that I've never seen before. So for me, like that was huge. It was fantastic. And I really loved the team. I loved the culture that we had. My hiring manager, he sold me on the role from the day we met. And so, yeah, I'm really enjoying building something out for the first time in the tech space, and I'm loving it.
That's incredible. I mean, I could definitely tell by the way that you're talking about the work and your personal journey. Also, thank you for sharing that with us here today, that this is something that you are passionate about. It's not just work for you, it's something that you live in your values too. And I think really, really important. And when you mentioned kind of your childhood, the relationships you had, the formative years, I think everybody is impacted by that, by how they show up, and everybody has different experiences. And I truly believe like the workplace is like a microcosm of society and the communities that we live in. I would love to know how you brought kind of your identities and your like experience into the workplace, and how that manifests at LiveRamp through like specific goals or pillars that the company is trying to achieve as well, bringing that into corporate America, I suppose.
Right. So what I am actually realizing, like early 2022 realization, is my superpower in this work, it really comes down to three things: vulnerability, communication, and grit, right? And so, and I think I acquired those skills because of my personal identities, right? Navigating this world would be so tough as a Black, Afro-Latinx, disabled, queer Jew. I don't know how the higher power thought I was gonna be able to do this, but I had to figure it out, right? And so for me, what has been crucial has been sharing my own story, really learning how to effectively listen and effectively develop action based off of that listening. Really being, held to the fire, my feet to the fire by myself, right? So having that grit to really follow through on initiatives really kind of like really make for this beautiful equation of me doing this work at LiveRamp. And so I filter that into our pillars through business, which is one, obviously thinking about how we impact the overall business in and of itself. Workforce, which really has to deal with the people and the culture of the company, and then social impact, which is, as we know, my jurisdiction, and really thinking about how we interact with communities outside of the company, how we develop that access to technology, how we develop educational equity, and how we support environmental justice, right? So that's kind of my world, and those are our pillars. And I think the beauty in me doing this work here is that I am able to look out for multiple people at one time, right? There's never a space in which I'm operating, which only one identity is active. And I think ultimately to reimagine company culture, you're going to need more people who have that experience, or at least can leverage that framework of mind to think about the intersectionality and the dual meaning behind activities and supporting people, and the dual meaning behind different policies that are put in place or different barriers that are removed, right? So yeah, that's kind of like our goals and how I ended up doing this work here, and I'm really loving it. I really am.
I love that. I love that. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces to the pillars that you were talking about in terms of business, workforce, and social impact. And I bet there's a lot of different projects
Yeah.
that you're working on at a given day, lots of pings to you, Chess, as well. And you mentioned that LiveRamp, of course, and you yourself are very data driven. And I've talked to people who have kind of different opinions around measuring the success of especially diversity, inclusion, and
Mhm.
belonging initiatives, because we don't want to over rely on metrics to say, okay, check the box, we are an equitable workplace. We don't need to work on it anymore. That's never
Right.
goal, but we also want things to be invested in. You want full-time employees working on these things, and you want to make sure that, we're adjusting when needed. What is your kind of philosophy around metrics and measuring
Yeah.
kind of these
Yeah.
pillars?
Well, I think measuring effectiveness in any sphere, you really need to be able to measure that quantitatively and qualitatively, right? So we can't over rely on metrics, but we can rely on them to some degree, right? We can't over rely on the qualitative aspect, but we can rely on it to some degree. The
Right.
other thing that people usually miss is, like, when you do events or you're doing programming, you're finishing a self ID campaign or a recruiting event, one of the best ways to understand and measure the effectiveness of that is to ask the participants directly, right? So let's just say you do a MLK event and you want to figure out if the speaker was appropriate, if it was aligned with the mission and values of your organization. That's when you slap 15 minutes on that calendar, you pick 5 random audience members, and you say, just want to grab 15 minutes to follow up on this event. Can we chat about your experience and let me know? You can also use that qualitative data and then couple it with the quantitative data of seeing, like, what are the demographics of the people who attended? Was it mostly people from engineering? Was it commercial? Are these folks male or female or non-binary? Like, you can
Right.
really start to look at that holistic story. And I think that's the overall fault of the diversity and inclusion space and how it's plugged into companies. A lot of people do not look at the whole picture or multiple labels of storytelling. Some people over rely on data. Some people over rely on the qualitative aspects, when really you have to put those two things next to each other and ultimately let that tell the story. So the data can help you track and create progression and really find out where the holes or needs may be fixed. Ultimately, like, the people are going to be the ones that ultimately tell you what that effectiveness is, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to use all of those different data points as well and tell a story. You have to intentionally do that too as the person behind the data, and you have all of it now. Now, what's the next step? What is this actually telling you as well? And not relying on one metric to say if you're
Right.
doing a good job
Right.
or not. And if you want to know how people are feeling about an event or program or initiative, you're right. You have to ask them. You have to ask them and parse out the information that you're receiving. In terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work, the other kind of piece of that story is, from an organizational perspective, do you think it is necessary for DIB's work to be within the realm of people, human resources, or I've heard some people say it should be a separate strategic business unit with a direct line to the CEO. Some folks say we shouldn't have a chief diversity officer. We should have program managers in each department of sales, marketing, things. There's a bunch of different ways to go about it,
Right.
but want to know what your opinion is.
Yeah, so I think the truth in what you just said is that it really depends on the kind of organization that you're in ultimately, and that will tell you what the business structure should be. A lot of times people don't really do the analysis, the kind of like organizational analysis necessary to understand how your organization would benefit from DIB work the best, right? Not necessarily what's up to the practitioner or what we believe, but ultimately having an objective view of how does this machine work, and then how do we strategize to get into the machine and build it out effectively. So that's like one of my like key drivers there. The second thing is that regardless of where it sits, we should have access to the C-suites, right? We need to be part of those conversations. We need to be part of those decisions being made. That's the second piece. So whatever I say next, like, please know that those are two things that I truly believe are true. Now, I am very fortunate that at LiveRamp, our chief people and culture officer was just a chief diversity officer at a major company. So we sit within the people team, and it's very much so a unicorn that you have that as your experience, right? Not every CHRO is going to have a DEI background, let alone the belief system or the credentials or the practice to really be able to help champion. So yeah, we sit under our chief people officer and have a direct line to our CEO, who's also widely engaged in the work that we're doing from an institutional and operational perspective. So for me, it really comes down to the org. I feel like if you don't necessarily have a leader who is equipped to do the work, then it makes the most sense to be under a CEO or a COO, because at the end of the day, DIB should be integrated throughout the entire business. But I'm just lucky. Like I just got lucky, and that's a beautiful thing for us here at LiveRamp.
No, I think that's great. And it's really important to emphasize you need leadership, you need executive support of these initiatives as well, because you can have really great inclusive managers or one awesome manager that everyone wants to work for. You could have Chess, you can have some great folks on the team who are pushing things forward, but also we had a webinar about this the other day too, around there's the individual onus, which is awesome. That's the ownership mentality. But then to make systemic changes, you need policies to change, you need to change these processes, and you need decision maker buy-in within the organization. I also kind of want to touch on a lot of folks are trying to, or I should say some companies are trying to lean into DIB work, and some friends, colleagues are saying, I wish they just wouldn't, because, they try to make a statement around social injustice, or they try to talk to employees and it just falls completely flat, specifically with the folks they're trying to be in alignment with or show support for. Understanding that every company is different, like you said, you need to do analysis, but what are your thoughts about that impact versus intent?
Yeah, I say if you don't know, do something, right? Like default to action, because you can't grow, learn, get better at the work if you don't do anything. Even me as a practitioner who has tenure in the space, yeah, sometimes I want to overthink and I want to engage this person and then I want to go here and think about it. And then 6 months have passed and we haven't done anything. But look what I just said, you haven't done anything. What's important to remember is that not saying anything is also an action, right? Famously in the social justice movement, silence is violence. So I get that a lot of us would prefer that people just shut up and didn't make a statement or didn't engage in DIB work because capitalism has no place in social justice. Like we could go down that rabbit hole all day if we wanted to. Right. But ultimately, whether you decide to engage or abstain, you are ultimately still making a choice. Right. When you don't say anything, when you don't do anything, you give people room to make up beliefs about you and your organization. And I think a lot of people miss that. right? Like when George Floyd, rest in peace, was murdered years ago, you had companies deciding like, oh, we shouldn't say anything. Oh, we should say something. Oh, some got called performative, some got called transactional, some got called this, some didn't do anything. And those who didn't do anything still got called performative and transactional.
Yes.
Right? So default to action. And if you get that feedback that you are performative and transactional, then you need to do the work to actually discover how to be transformational, right? And so when I hear like people saying like, oh, I wish we didn't engage in this work, or I wish we didn't do XYZ, I don't actually believe that it's because they don't want it or don't believe that it's necessary, but it is very much so a whiplash when somebody releases a black square or puts Black Lives Matter in their bio, and like that's just kind of it. When they spark up an ERG and they're like, we hit our benchmark, DIB is closed, right? Like I think that's more so where that's coming from, rather than just like the blanket statement that this work shouldn't be happening, because they would just rather not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Saying nothing definitely says something. And I like that kind of default to action. That's the only way that people learn, get better, and have these conversations and really lean into the work, and also show that you have some sort of care for the conversation that is happening as well. I mean, I think I know the answer to kind of my next question around holding space for hard, vulnerable, and perhaps uncomfortable conversations in the workplace. But do you think this is a requirement for corporate organizations to do so, and why?
You know, I'm going to give an answer that I don't think you're expecting.
Okay.
And I actually don't believe it's a requirement.
Okay.
It's not a requirement. But if they want to be amongst the best.
Yeah, there you go.
If they want to be amongst the best, then you know what you have to do, right? We all know the Great Resignation is real. The younger generation in this workforce will drop a job like a bad habit. They will actually drop the job before the bad habit. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, taking care of your employees and communities of color and women is a non-negotiable now, right? And so if that is not happening, you can expect the peace sign and a letter of resignation and a severance check. And that's just what it is, right? I don't really know how to other phrase that. And so, yeah, I don't think should is necessarily part of my ethos in this work, but I do believe that if you want to be amongst the best, you want to have great company culture, you want to really invest in your people, you want to not have such bad retention numbers, then you will do it. So is it a requirement? Nah, but if you're down, you need to be down. And so at LiveRamp, I think something that we do, which is really nice, is that we don't want to wait until a crisis is happening. Yeah. Right? We want to proactively provide that space and hold that space. We want to be creating rooms for belonging and connectivity so that when things do happen, when we are in crisis, people already have their community. Mm-hmm. They already know where they belong. They know who to reach out to. It doesn't have to be like 2 summers ago when we were watching all of this terrible stuff happening in the media, this racism, this murder, this et cetera, that we now got to scramble and find each other and build the ERG and get the donations out. Like, we proactively have that space. We have those mental health check-ins. We have that anti-internalized racism conversation when we need to have it, right? Like, we do all of those things proactively. And so I think that's a huge thing too, that a lot of companies miss, right? Around this whole idea of holding space. You shouldn't just be holding space when people are in crisis. Like, no, you got to hold space regularly, and you have to show up and support people when they're at their best as well, right? Like, you got to celebrate those wins too.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely is important to be proactive around these conversations and make sure that you are celebrating and understanding and actively listening to your team and employees 365 days a year. And definitely holding space, I think, looks different for everyone. Empowering employees looks different for everyone, depending on kind of identities that we talked about as well. And in terms of diversity and inclusion, diversity in itself, just breaking it down for one word, means different things no matter where you are in different cities in the United States or different countries around the world. I know LiveRamp is a global organization. What needs to remain kind of local and what needs to stay global? If you could provide some examples for folks who are listening who also work at global organizations.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go with the question backwards. I think local communities have different needs. And a lot of times people forget that. They think that one initiative in one space is going to make sense elsewhere, right? So, in the interest of globalizing diversity and inclusion, you also have to localize it. And so that means giving back to the communities in which you have offices. It means supporting the communities that your employee base represents. Local activism is so important. And so for us in the work I do at LiveRamp on the social impact side of DIB, we are really trying to get intentional and get our employees to take time away from their work and really get involved in the community. And that could look like mentoring college students throughout their entire college career. It could be supporting students through a hackathon. It could be going out and helping build furniture for schools who have a low teacher availability rate for those after school programs, right? And it's really getting local. And that is necessary for like some communities, and other communities is not. Maybe other communities might need mental health resources or support around public transit. Like, and that's what I mean when it's like getting intentional and not necessarily being transactional, and also keeping those partnerships going long term. So we have like one partner out in Colorado. We just did something with them back in November. Then we're going to come back and do it again in April and do something new at the end of the summer with people's families, right? Like, it's really building those longer term relationships. On that global scale, what is helpful for global storytelling is really around the data and metrics part, not only on gender, but also kind of like the experience of how people work. Do you feel like you're overworking? How are parents being treated? Are the benefits in the US conducive for the benefits that are over in the EU? Really thinking about that global experience and those through lines that really tie us all together, and those shared experience that we have can be done on a global scale. But then when we talk about localization, you really got to think about what is intentionally going to serve the people that you're trying to serve.
Yeah, I think what I hear you saying too is getting really specific and intentional around kind of the community that you are helping in terms of long-term partnerships, because everybody is different, and also using data to really inform your decision from who's in your office, what is their experience, how many working parents are in the organization, what resources do they need, do they have a newborn, do they have an 18-year-old,
Right.
because that's different, and really looking into kind of what would be successful and iterating different ways to engage folks as well in this work. In terms of social impact, similar to kind of my other question around not should, but for companies who really want to be the best of the best, attract the best talent, retain the best talent, do you think it's something that they need to do in terms of engaging with their local community and having an arm of their business be dedicated to social impact work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's the right thing to do. And that's one of our values at LiveRamp, is that we do what's right. And ultimately, I don't think I can have another belief system because of how I grew up, right? Like, I grew up in the streets volunteering and on the
Yeah.
ground, like that's where I come from. So yes, I do believe so. And because we live in a system where people are forced to work to sustain life,
Yes.
if that's the case, then that workplace needs to be providing these opportunities to do these things, right? That's kind of my draw there. And then on the flip side, a lot of people feel connected to work because they get to go out into the community and do things and make an impact, right? Like, I might not have $5,000 to give to said nonprofit that I care about, but me and my team, we can fundraise, and then we can request a corporate match, and then we can also give our time, and then we give them that $5,000 in a new intentional and community-based way. So again, I think it creates more touch points for belonging, for inclusivity, for creating moments of experience and impact outside of work, that ultimately when people return to work, they feel rejuvenized by being involved in the community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I definitely agree too. We do. We have this
Yeah.
place where, we have to work. And I think that it is important that you have that as part of the mission and kind of
Mhm.
values system behind the organization too. I know I
Yeah.
asked a lot of specific questions around kind of your work, your
Yeah.
experience, your journey to LiveRamp as well, your foundation. But if you were to pick just one, or the top of mind, what's the current problem you're trying to solve?
At work or in the world?
Um, Both if they're different.
Okay. Okay. At work, it's alignment of activity.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of passion, which I'm grateful for, because sometimes as practitioners, we have to do a lot of the drumming up of passion and activating the inner genius and getting people thinking. That's not really a problem for me at work, which is great. The one I am trying to solve though is aligning this activity, right? So like, how do we get all of the work happening that is DIB centered, driving into our pillars? How do we leverage kind of like the visibility that we have through executive sponsors or people who are just down for the cause and get that into alignment with our pillars, right? So that's kind of my challenge and a problem to solve right now. In terms of in the world, I'm really going back to my roots and getting involved in environmental justice work. I am learning that it is so crucial and important and vital for the work that we're doing right now as a society to be sustained, right? So yeah, that's kind of like my current passion. Just before that, it was access to technology, but
Right.
now I've moved into the environmental justice world.
I love that. I think
Yeah.
that we personally do more to learn about the environmental justice world as well. And I think that it's great that you're doing really impactful work inside and outside of work as well, work with a capital W. Uh,
Yes.
we are in February 2022.
Woo-hoo!
We made made and continue to make it. Love to see it. And I want to ask how LiveRamp is celebrating and honoring Black History Month in a
Mm,
really authentic and genuine way. Also recognizing we just talked about it in terms of global and local. It's Black History Month in the United States. I believe in the UK it is in October. And you should really be energizing,
yeah,
empowering, and talking, obviously, to
yeah.
your Black employees 365 days a year. But
Yes, of course.
yes, but I want to ask you this question. So, what's happening?
Yeah. So for us, we really have the philosophy that whenever there is a culture or heritage month or day of recognition, whatever it might be, that's when you actually celebrate the wins you've made for the community, right? We don't have this idea that like Black people are only Black during February.
Right.
That's not our vibe. Our vibe is actually the opposite. People are Black 365, sometimes 366 days a year, and we should be using that month for celebration.
Yeah.
So we're doing a Black History bruncheon, which is gonna be great. People are gonna wear all Black. We're gonna have, some beverages and some food, which is gonna be great. We've also had a speaker series running this month, so we've invited different Black leaders to come in and give speeches as well. We're doing a mental health session with a group therapist, which is going to be great on the Black experience. We're also doing some fundraising this month. And then I've partnered actually with somebody from our HR employee relations team, that whole world. And we've been interviewing different Black employees to learn about their experience at work and really just creating that open space to share positive, neutral, or negative feedback if they have it, and then ultimately make decisions to increase their experience of being Black at work. So that's kind of like what we're doing, and that's how we're celebrating this year.
I love that. A brunch in and programming, creating space. I love a good therapy session as
You
well.
know, you know.
Lots to say there. Well, it sounds like you're really honoring Black History Month and also 365 days a year, being really intentional and
Yeah.
holistic in your thought process, in your actions, and LiveRamp's actions as well. I want to ask you too, because you're doing so many things, and we're solving big issues here. Is there a recent big or small day to day or big goal, proudest moment for you in this work that comes to mind?
Recent.
Yeah, recently.
So the DIB team at LiveRamp started in September of 2020.
Mhm.
So we're a little over our 1 year anniversary. I got here in June of 2021. And I think the thing I've seen change over the past 6, 7 months is that we have gone from being somewhere that people have to be voluntold to do this work to having too many inquiries on how to get involved. And that, for me, is a great sign in the shift of culture. Again, right? We have a lot of passion at the company, which is great. But even sometimes people don't know how to activate that.
Sure.
And I think when I first joined, it was like a little bit of people just sitting in that, I don't know how to activate this thing I'm feeling. Like, can you tell me what to do and I'll just do it? Two people coming to me and say, hey, there's this organization, they have this issue, I want to help them, can we support them, X, Y, and Z? And then my team has to figure out, okay, like, we need X amount of people to come help with this and do this and do this. And like, that is just such a fulfilling feeling to have, to know that the work that you're doing is not only having an impact, but you're also influencing people so positively that they are going above and beyond their day-to-day to be involved. And that's not just in the ERG community, right? Like, these are just everyday LiveRamp employees who are noticing that there are problems in the world to be solved, and they can leverage their talent, their expertise, people around them who don't even work at the company to make that happen. And so for me, that's just like the biggest win. It's huge. So yeah, I consider myself a lucky gal, I'm not gonna lie. And I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
That's awesome. I love that answer because it's about it's so many people getting involved and really wanting to and seeing the value behind getting involved as well.
Yes.
You're manifesting, and it's kind of like that ripple effect too, in terms of people at LiveRamp, people in the lives of people who work at LiveRamp in the community as well. So I think that is incredible.
Yeah.
Just talked about a lot today in our conversation, but
we did.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to share, or a key, one or two key takeaways you want to underscore for folks who are listening?
Yeah. I think I have one. And bringing us back to the topic of the show.
Yeah.
Reimagining company culture is the most effective when you are able to release what you used to know and what you're used to doing and lean into the unknown, right? That's what ultimately creates a lot of fear when you're talking about gender equity, racism, ableism, exclusion, right? People have not yet released their old beliefs or their old behavior systems. And to reimagine, you first need to know that you have an imagination. And then you need to let go of what your past beliefs are so that you can activate it. So I think that's just kind of like my key thing that I've learned from myself as well, and that I try to instill in others, is that in order to ultimately redo this way of life that we've been doing, we need to be able to imagine a better, different way of doing. And so, yeah, I hope everybody takes that. I hope you take that. I hope I remember it. It's so crucial and beneficial. And I think that goes in our personal lives as well, right? Sometimes we have things we want to do or people we want to be or goals we want to reach, and we just haven't released ourselves from those old behaviors and beliefs we've had about a thing or ourselves. So I really hope people take that and just.
I'm thinking about Frozen and Elsa singing the song Let It Go, and let go of business as usual, let go of, know, the way things are done today doesn't have to be the way they're done tomorrow.
No.
So we can always make it better. So Chess, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon. I, as always, appreciated speaking with you.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely.
And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. And of course, reimagine company culture. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.